Hey, this is Ralph, and in this video we're going to create a small little web page. Specifically, this is for my CIS 101 students, and we want to get a feel for a little bit of online education, basically following along with a tutorial video as you make something. But we're also going to hit the three key topics of front-end web development. So we're going to do a little bit of HTML, a little bit of CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. And I imagine this is going to be foreign topics for everybody in the class. So my key advice is go slow, watch carefully, type what I type, test frequently. And that's what we're going to do. Now you could use any text editor that's already on your computer. I'm going to be using a little program that I just updated, but it's called Notepad++. And go ahead and grab that. If you're a Mac user, just use whatever text editor is already on your Mac. There's a great program called VS Code. Microsoft makes it, VS Code, which is fantastic. That's what I typically use. But Notepad++ is a smaller, faster program, and it's got everything that we are certainly going to need for this particular exercise. Okay, so go ahead and grab that. I'm going to go ahead and launch Notepad++. There it is right there. And this is how the program looks. Let me maximize it first, just so it's filling up the screen. Now, once you're on your code editor, in this case a text editor, I can press Control+ several times, and that'll zoom in. That'll make my font nice and big. I'll zoom in a little bit more. All right, well, that looks pretty good. You can also change the color coding, the color theme, pretty easily. I think that is under settings. Yeah, settings, style configurator. And when I used to use this program a lot, I remember Blackboard was always my go-to one in class. So I'll choose Blackboard, and then I'll click Save and Close, and there we go. So now I've got my code editor open. Before I start working and creating our web page here, I'm going to take an important step, and I'm going to click File, Save As, and I am going to just save this to my desktop. Everything we do, for the most part, there is going to be an image included too. I think I want you to see how to put an image into a page. Everything we're going to do, though, is going to be contained in this main file. And this is very likely going to be part of an assignment. So you'll want to save this and follow along with me, so that way you can turn this file in later for part of your assignment grade. And I'm going to go ahead and call this practice-webpage.html. Now I'm saving this with all lowercase letters and no spaces. So, and I'm literally typing in the .html. Even though it says save as type txt over here, this is a code editor, a plain text editor, so it wants to by default save as a text file. But if we force it to save as a web page file with an HTML extension, that's going to override that text extension. But again, that's saved with all lowercase and no spaces. I'm going to click Save, and I can see that my file name is up in this little tab right up here. And if I minimized everything, I can see that this web page is on my desktop, because that's where I chose to save it to. So it's right up there. All right, that's good to know. Now I'm back over to my code editor. So there it is. I've got my web page started. How does it look actually if I were to view it with a web browser, which we're going to do quite a lot? Now on my Windows machine, I'm going to do this. I'm going to press Windows left arrow, and that's going to send this over onto the left side of my screen. I'll click on my browser, which I already have open. Got a bunch of stuff open, but that's okay. I'm actually going to open up a new tab, and I'm going to press Control-O to open a new file. Now what I'm going to do first is I'm going to head over to my desktop, and I'm looking for that practice web page. There it is right there, practice-webpage.html. I'm going to double click it, and there we go. So what I'm looking at over on the right is my web page in a web browser. I'm not publishing today, but if I did, this is what everybody in the world would see. And they say, wow, that's pretty boring. Over on the left is my code. Well, there's nothing over there either. Now, if I were to type some letters and then save this web page by clicking the little floppy disk save button, and then I go back over to my browser and reload, I'm going to start to see that stuff appear. So we're working on a web page by coding it in one application and then viewing our results in another application. I'm going to do that a lot today. I'm going to make some changes to the code side of things. I'm going to save, and then I'm going to reload or refresh on the browser. By the way, on Windows, the F5 key is the universal refresh key, so we could do that too. All right, well, that seems pretty good. I'm going to hide my tabs over here just so I have a little bit more screen real estate to play around with. All right, well, let's get to work. Now, I don't think there's anyone in class that has experience with a lot of web page stuff or JavaScript, but what we're going to be creating here is a simple web page, and it's going to have 3 little sliders on it. And these 3 sliders are going to control the background color of the web page. So we're going to use HTML to create the sliders. We're going to use some CSS or cascading style sheets in order to do some basic page styling. And we're going to use some JavaScript in order to get information from the sliders when somebody changes them and to recolor or alter those page colors. So let's start off with the HTML. So on my code, I'm going to go ahead and write a few things. They're going to seem a little bit weird. Here we go. It's called a doc type definition. I am going to use a number of key terms in this video, and these would be very potential quiz questions. So if you're in my class, definitely go through this slow and careful. Listen, take notes even. We could take notes right in our file for a lot of stuff too. So that's a doc type definition. Right after that, I'm going to create a head section. Oh, I'm already starting off with a mistake. Let me back up here. HTML language equals en-us. Then the head tag. Ours is going to be pretty simple here. Title, practice web page. Let's see, I'm going to make my font just a little bit smaller so it doesn't wrap like that. Meta car set equals UTF-8. And I'm going to create a section here for styles. And then a closing head tag, an opening body tag, closing body tag, closing HTML tag. There we go. So that's a lot of work. So definitely pause your video, type what I've typed here, and this is the start of our web page. And it looks, I think I've typed everything properly. Here's a kind of a bummer deal though. I'm going to save this now that I've made all these changes. I'm going to head over to my browser and I'm going to refresh, and there's nothing on there. Even though we've done all of this work, the web browser isn't displaying anything. Well, I take that back. It is doing something. If I turned my tabs back on, you would see that the name of my tab, Practice Web Page, is showing up. So the web browser is getting information from our title tag and displaying it as the title of that web page, displaying it in the browser tab. All right, well, that's pretty good. But my page is blank, and my page is blank because there is nothing in the body of my page. If I were to type some text in here, save and refresh, then we're going to see that content display on the web page as well. Okay, don't need that over there. But this is the start of making a web page. And by the way, this is all HTML or hypertext markup language, HTML5. Technically, I guess there are subversions of that, but basically HTML5. Now, I want to start to add some content on here. So I'm going to go into the body section of my page, and I'm going to create some more content. Let's see. Let's do a headline 1, and this will be a practice web page. And then after that, I'm going to write a paragraph. And within this paragraph, I'm going to have my full name. I want you to put your name in there too. I'm going to do a break tag. Assignment, let's see, this is going to be assignment 5, I believe. IT education, another break tag. CIS 101 IT orientation. Okay, and then after that, I'm going to do a closing paragraph. So basically, the H1 tags up here, by the way, that's a headline level 1 or heading 1. And then we've got a paragraph here. This paragraph has several lines, and a couple times I typed in a break tag to break to a new line. So if we were doing this in Microsoft Word, this would be the heading 1 style. And then I'd have a paragraph, but even in Word, you can create line breaks. Shift-Enter. Well, this is a line break. Breaking to a new line. Now, if I save this, head over to my browser, and refresh, we're going to see that content display. I'm pretty happy with that. It's getting that information up there. Now, we're going to move from HTML, hypertext markup language, and we're going to move over to CSS, cascading style sheets, so that we can change the appearance. HTML is creating the structure of the page. CSS is going to create the style of the page, the colors and stuff like that. And then we're going to use JavaScript to manage behaviors on the page. Those 3 technologies are really what make up web development. Okay, so in the style, again, you're going to write what I write, and it's going to be a little bit confusing, but you might start to notice the logic or the syntax of why I'm writing it this way. Let's see, I'm going to take the body of my page, and that's a curly brace over there, right? By the way, it's the word body, space, and then a curly brace. And I'm going to put in background color, sandy brown, semicolon. Actually, I'm going to change that to tan just so it's a shorter line. And I'm going to change the font family to Verdana. And then after that, I'll do a closing curly brace. So I'm making very small changes there. So in between my opening and closing style tags are HTML, but inside I've got what's called a CSS reset rule. And that's going to basically change the background color of my web page, but it's also going to change the font that's displayed on my web page. I'm going to press Control S to save, head over to my browser and refresh, and I can see that those changes have made place. 2 changes. Background color has changed and my font has changed. Experiment with something else, by the way. The page you turn into me for an assignment doesn't have to fit exactly with what I'm doing. So once you see that I've typed in one font family, well, what if you typed in a different font? Some may work, some may not. What about different colors? What other colors can you think of? Sky blue, Control S, refresh. There we go. We can change that pretty easily. Pink, Control S to save, browser, refresh. So we can change some things quite easily on this web page just by changing the values of the CSS declaration. All right, feeling pretty good about that. Now let's do some more stuff. Again, I'm working in my style section. This is CSS now, cascading style sheets. I'm going to change the H1. So I write H1 space, opening curly brace, press enter, and then tab. By the way, when you see me pressing the tab key, it's not really that important. I'm only doing it just so things are a little bit neater and a little bit easier to read on screen. Now my headline 1, I'm going to do something here. Text dash align colon center, enter. And let's see, I'm going to do border dash top 2 pixels solid hashtag 222 semicolon, border bottom colon 2 pixels solid hashtag 222 semicolon, enter. There we go. I'm going to drag this over just a bit. All right, so I've made a couple changes to my headline 1. Control S to save. Oops, I forgot my closing curly brace. Let's go ahead and put that in there. Control S to save, browser refresh. Okay, so I've added some borders on the top and the bottom. By the way, that hashtag 222, that's a color code. That's a very dark gray, almost black. Not quite black, but pretty darn close to black. All right, that looks pretty good. And now that you're wondering, hey, well, if he can do hashtag 222, what other numbers could you put in there? Could you put in 789? Control S to save, browser refresh, and sure enough, you can see my borderline has changed colors. I'll do the same thing with this one, 789. Control S, browser refresh. So that's one way to display colors on a web page. There's several ways. That's just one of the ways. All right, feeling good about that. Next thing we're going to do is I'm going to write H1 space plus space paragraph space opening curly brace, enter, tab. What I'm controlling next is a paragraph that's adjacent to my headline 1. Basically, I'm styling the paragraph that's next to my headline 1. And again, I'm going to do text align center. And actually, let's do text align right. Text align right. And I'm going to do font size 150%, which should be 50% larger than what it normally is. 100% would be the same or the default. 150% would be kind of like multiplying it by 1.5. And how about a background color that is hashtag 222 and a foreground color that's hashtag FFC, semicolon, closing curly braces. So look at this syntax. I'm using lots of colons. There's a lot of semicolons. I'm typing in lowercase letters practically exclusively and using a lot of those curly braces. Control S to save, browser refresh. Oh, pretty neat. Okay, I'm not quite done yet. I'm going to go back to this paragraph styling, and I'm going to create another line after my color. I'm going to put in padding 8px for 8 pixels. Notice there's no space between the 8 and the px. And what else am I going to do? How about this? Line height. Let's try 14 point. Let's see how that looks. Control S to save, browser refresh. 14 points apparently not quite good enough. Since my font is so big, I think that's what's going on here. So I might change this to, how about 24 points? Is that going to be too big? Control S to save, browser refresh. Nope, I'm actually quite satisfied with that. And do I want to do anything else with this paragraph? I'm going to do one more thing. H1, I think this is going to work, space plus P, colon, colon, first dash line. Opening curly braces. Let me try this out first. I think this will work. And let's see, I'm going to change the color to hashtag FF0, which I'll do FF2. Closing curly braces. Control S to save, browser refresh. Sure enough. So now my name, which is the first line of that paragraph, is a brighter yellow, whereas the other text in there is a different shade of yellow. So basically, I'm controlling the first line of the paragraph that's adjacent to my headline 1. I think it's a pretty good experimentation for what we can do with some CSS. So we've used CSS to control the look, the style of our page, and we've got the HTML to control the structure, the content of that page. Let's jump back and create some more HTML. I'm going to do a heading 2 now. So just like there's a heading 1, there's also a heading 2. There's also heading 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now for my heading 2, let's learn something new about web development that we probably didn't know before. Let's play around with colors using HSL. Now after that headline 2, notice I did a closing headline 2 tag. I'm going to write a little paragraph. with some directions for the visitor of this web page. Remember, this visitor is going to be presented with some slide rules that they can move left and right. And in that, changing those slide rules is going to change the color of our page. So let's see. In this paragraph, I'm going to say, change the sliders, I'll just call them sliders. Change the sliders to change the hue, saturation, and light changing the sliders will affect the background color of the web page. Closing paragraph. There we go. So we got a little paragraph. I'm going to Control S to save, head to my browser, and refresh. There we go. Now notice my headline 2 is styled differently than my headline 1. That's because my CSS is only controlling the look of the headline 1. I don't think I'm going to change the look of my headline 2, but if you were going to do that on your page, use a similar technique here for the headline 2 instead. And you could pop that right down here at the end. You could just type in headline 2, curly braces, and some things that you might want to try. Give it a shot. I'm not going to do that though. Notice the paragraph that I have here looks quite a bit different than the paragraph I did above. Again, those two paragraphs are different because I've already styled the paragraph that's adjacent to my headline 1. This paragraph is adjacent to a headline 2, so of course it looks different. All right, so that looks pretty good. Now after this paragraph, this is where I want to start to create my little sliders. Input type equals range. That's actually enough for us to at least get started. And I'll just do one of them for now. Control S to save, browser refresh, and sure enough, there's that little slider right there. It looks pretty tiny though compared to the rest of my page. I think we'll style that so it looks a little bit better. But that's how you create a slider on a page. Not very exciting unless you get past the whole point that we can click and we can manipulate something on the web page. But we're going to have to use some JavaScript, the third language we're going to experiment with today, in order to get the input from the slider and then do something to that data. All right, well that's pretty good. Now let's make it more useful though to our visitor. In front of the word input, I'm going to put in a label tag, and then I'm going to write hue, and then after the input, actually I'll do it down here, I'll put a closing label tag. There we go. So now we have the word hue there so we understand what that means. I'll put this on a separate line too. All right, well that's pretty good. I'm going to copy this, paste it a couple times, because in addition to hue, we also want to know the saturation and the light. Control S to save, browser refresh. So now we have these 3 slide rules right there. Okay, I'm pretty good with that. Now we're definitely not done, but let's do some styling so that each of these is presented on its own line and they're also a little bit bigger for the user. I'm going to move up to the styling area. I'm still within my style tags, and I'm going to do this. Label, curly braces. Let's see, I want to display block, enter, text transform, uppercase, semicolon, closing braces. Let's see what that does. Control S to save on the code, browser refresh. They're all in different lines, and my labels, hue, saturation, and light, are all in uppercase letters. I'm going to go back to that. Margin bottom, let's try 24 pixels. Control S to save, browser refresh. Give a little vertical spacing between them. All right, next, input, curly braces. Let's see, I want to do transform, not text transform, transform scale 2. Notice that 2 is in parentheses. Let me test that and make sure that works. It sure did work. However, it caused some other issues, it looks like. So I'm also going to do this. I think I'll do it this way. Let's see, scale 2, translate x colon. Once again, let's see if this even works for me. How about, let me just try 100 pixels to see if that gets me somewhere. Control S to save, browser refresh. Nope, it broke something. I don't think I need that comma. Control S to save, browser refresh. Nope, that's not working for me. Oh, I don't have things spelled properly. It's written this way. Translate x parentheses 400 pixels. There we go. That's what I should be doing. Refresh. Oh, got to save first on the code and then refresh. Ah, that's the big number I was looking for. So let's try this again. I'm going to put in scale parentheses 2 comma control S to save, browser refresh. Now I don't think that's working, so let me get rid of that comma. Control S, refresh. Ah, that's working. They're off the screen. I'm going to dial this back to 100 pixels. I think that's pretty good, and I'll dial that back to about 50 pixels. Yeah, I think I can handle that. Whew, all that work. So syntax is incredibly important. Sometimes commas are used, sometimes they're not, but definitely we have to get the syntax written properly. Now, part of the reason I was struggling with the syntax is because I haven't typed this in a while. Good news is that there's lots of documentation on this all over the web. There are great websites that explain what to type. There are great books to explain what to type. And if you're using a more full-featured code editor like VS Code, it'll actually give you drop-downs of choices. So it'll kind of help you along the way. But yep, so I was just typing a syntax error, basically a misspelling in the code. Okay, well, I'm pretty happy with that. Now, let's put in my closing curly brace, make sure that's in there. Next, I want to start writing some JavaScript. And I am going to write, actually, we need to do something first. I guess we don't technically need to do it first. No, I guess we don't. We will have to do it, but we're not going to do it first because basically it would be a little bit unsatisfying. You wouldn't really see the result yet. So what I want to do is I'm going to move down to the lower part of my page. I'm still in the body of the page, but I'm near the very bottom, and I'm going to create a section here called script. So in the head section of our page, we created a section called style to contain CSS code. Now, at the bottom of our page in the body, we're creating a section called script to contain some JavaScript. Now, within this script section, I'm going to be doing several things. I'm going to start off with what's called a function. I'm going to create a function called change color. Now, this function has a name called change color. Notice I've got lowercase c for change and then an uppercase c for color, and they're all squished together. And there's also an empty set of parentheses after those. And then there's a set of curly braces. Basically, a function is kind of like a set of instructions that we're going to call or invoke at some particular event. Now, within this function, I need to do a couple things. I'm going to declare a variable. I'm going to let h equal document.get element by ID, parentheses, single quote, hue, single quote, closing parentheses, dot value, semicolon. Now, I'm going to make my font a little bit smaller, and I'm doing this just so things fit on one line a little bit more easily. Now, I'm not done for sure, but I want you to pay special attention to my syntax, the way I've written this. I'm declaring a variable called h. That h variable is going to get its value from an element on my web page that has an ID. But wait a minute, I don't have an ID. So what I need to do is head back up here to where my hue is, and I'm going to put in ID equals hue. So the range slider that represents my hue is going to get inserted, or the value of that is going to get inserted into this h variable. Very weird. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, let's dig a little bit deeper here. Now, in addition to declaring that variable for h, I'm going to declare another variable, let HSL, which is a combination of hue, saturation, and light. We're only practicing right now with one of the items, one of the variables, hue. And this is going to be equal to, let's see, single quote, HSL, opening parentheses, single quote, plus H, plus single quote, comma, 100%, comma, 50%, closing parentheses, single quote, semicolon. Now, this is going to look pretty darn weird, and you might even want to finish watching the video, get a feel for what the end result is really going to be, and then you're going to start to see, and then you can come back and type along with me here. So basically, we're creating this variable called HSL, which is going to be, it's going to contain some text that I'm typing in, but it's also getting the H. Now the H is the value from the slider. All right, so we have these two variables. We have the H variable and the HSL variable, and those variables represent something else. Next thing we're going to do, document .body .style .background color. Notice the word background color is all lowercase except for the C in color. And that's going to be equal to HSL, semicolon. And let's see. The closing curly brace that I have right there, that needs to be down here. So I've got my function. I'm declaring a variable called h, which gets its value from the range slider for hue. I'm declaring a variable called HSL, which is a concatenation, a joining of some text plus my variable h. And then I'm taking that new variable HSL, and I'm going to use that to control the background color of the web page. Okay. Now to test this out, we need to invoke this function, and I'm going to do it inline. My function name is change color parentheses. I'm going to head back up here, and in my input, I'm going to put on input equals quotation change color empty set of parentheses quotation. In fact, if this was on a line by itself, still within that input, I think it would look a little bit easier to read. All right, I'm going to Control S to save. I'm going to head to my browser and refresh. Now if I change my hue slider, I'm getting those color changes. So I can go to red, I can move up to green and stuff like that. Well, looks like it's starting to work. Now I'm going to change a couple things here. For instance, the way the hue works, it can be a number between 0 and 359. So I'm going to do a min of 0 and a max of 359. There we go. And I'm putting these attributes right inside of that input tag. We may not notice too much, but if I Control S to save and browser refresh, we can see that all the way to the left is red, all the way to the right now, I get to red again. So 359 is pretty much as close to red as 0. But now I'm getting the full range of the 360-degree color wheel. That's what's going on right there. All right, well, that looks like it's working well. Now that we can do that one range slider for color, we should be able to take care of the others, saturation and light. Now, for saturation, I'm going to do ID equals sat. The min is going to be equal to 0, and the max is going to be equal to 100. The saturation value is a little different than the hue value. Saturation will be 0% to 100%. And then similar, light, ID equals, I'll just do LIT to keep that 3-letter thing going. The min will be also 0, and the max will be 100. Something else I think I'll do here. Oh, actually, I can go ahead and do the on input. So I'm going to copy that, paste, and paste. So all 3 of these sliders will control that same function. And let's see. I'm going to do this. I'm going to start. I think start is what I want, or do I want value? I think I'll do value. Value equals 0, which means when I refresh, my hue should start all the way to the far left. Oh, let's Control S to save, refresh, good. It's all the way in the far left. I like that. And then for saturation, I want that to start all the way to the right. So I'm going to do value equals 100. And then for light, I'm going to do value equals 50. I want that to start in the middle. So if I save my code, refresh the page, hue starts at 0, saturation starts at 100, light starts at 50. By the way, that is the color for a very bright red. So if I wanted to start my page that way, I could also jump up here where I have that pink page color, and I could set the background to be HSL 0, 100%, 50% using the hue, saturation, light syntax. Save that, browser refresh, and now I'm starting at that bright red. And my hue, saturation, and light sliders are in the appropriate location. Okay, feeling good about that. So now we just need to work a little bit more on our JavaScript. Let's see, I'm going to zoom back out. No, I don't want to zoom out there. I'm good down here. Let's see. A little trick, by the way, in Notepad++, if I recall, you can just click on a line, Control D for duplicate, and it will copy those lines very easily. So I'm going to have H, S, and L. We're going to get the sat, and we're going to get the light, L-I-T. So I'm basically declaring a couple more variables using the same kind of syntax, the same technique that I used before. Okay, now we have to customize this HSL variable down here. The H is good. Actually, I think I'll just kind of rewrite it from this point. It's going to look a little weird because we've got all these single quotes in there. Let's see. So we've got the H, then we're going to have a comma, and then a single quote, plus the saturation, plus single quote, %, comma, single quote, plus the light, plus single quote, comma, %, closing parentheses, single quote. Again, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit so we can just see this all in one line. I think it's written properly, and it looks very, very confusing, but what I'm trying to do here is reconstruct the HSL syntax, but instead of having the 0, the 100, and the 50, I'm using the H, the S, and the L variables. But otherwise, I need to reproduce that syntax. I need the letters HSL, opening parentheses, I need the commas, I need the %, and I need that closing parentheses. I think I've got it here. We're going to find out pretty soon, though, for sure. HSL, hue, comma, saturation, %, comma, light. Don't need a comma there. I do need the %, closing parentheses. Okay, let's see how that works. And of course, this part isn't going to change. All right, fingers crossed. Control S to save on the code. Browser refresh. Now, of course, our hue worked before. Looks like changing the hue still works. I'll go to this green color. Now, if I change the saturation, here's what I would expect. To the far right, at 100%, saturation is bright. If I move saturation down, the color should get softer. Sure enough, look at that. It softens out to almost like a gray there. So it goes from green to gray. And if I change my hue back to 0, it's a grayish pink. And then as I bring it to the right, it becomes bright red. Cool. Now light, if I go to the right, closer to 100%, it should become almost white or white. And if I go to the left, closer to 0%, it should become black. So I'm going to scroll to the left. And sure enough, it's getting darker to black. And if I go to the right, it's getting lighter to white. So it looks like things are working as we would have expected. Hue, saturation, and light, all controlling HTML and CSS. Now, I see we've got a little bit of time left. Let's do one more thing on here on this script. So we've got a lot going on. I'm going to get rid of a line space there. There's my function, starts up there. Now, after I've constructed this, here's what I want to change. Basically, if the light is dark, that's kind of a weird thing to say. If my HSL value is dark, I want my text color to be much lighter than it is. So I think I'm going to do a little if statement. If, parentheses, if my light variable is greater than 50, because remember my light value is going to be between 0 and 100. Now if it's greater than 50, closing parentheses, own set of curly braces there. Now don't forget the curly braces down here is the end of my function. So I just put a comment down there. Now if my light, my hue, saturation, and light is greater than 50, then it's a very light color. Okay? So I want my font, I think, to be dark. So in that situation, I'm going to say document.body.style.color, which is text color, is going to be equal to black, and I'll put that in single quotes, just the color black. Now, I still want to have, now I need my closing curly braces for that if, and then I'm going to write the word else, semicolon, document.body.style.color equals quotation white. Enter closing curly braces. Okay, this is called an if statement or a conditional. If my light, that's the letter L by the way, if my letter L is greater than 50, then that means my background color is a light color. And if that's true, well then I want my document color of my text to be black. Otherwise, light must be less than 50, and if light's less than 50, it's becoming dark. Then I want my text color to be white. Let's see if this works. Control S to save, browser refresh. I start with red, and of course my light's right in the middle, but if I take my light and go lighter, my text is black. Now what if I go lower, making the page darker? See that crossover point right there? I can cross over. Now my text color is light. Changes back to dark, back to light. Well, there we go. So think, kind of an interesting exercise. And I know it's very, very confusing. And in this class, we're not actually going to be creating web pages. This is not a regular thing. The whole point of this exercise is really just to follow along and create something and get a little bit of exposure, a little bit of hands-on practice using some front-end web development coding syntax, some languages. Now, we used HTML. Remember, HTML was used to create the headlines, the paragraphs, and even these range sliders. We used style sheets to set some default characteristics, the look, the style of the elements on the web page. And then we used JavaScript in order to control the behaviors of the web page. So when a user interacts and alters the inputs of the page, we get some different reactions. There you go. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, 3 languages for what's called front-end web development and making web pages. Thanks for hanging out with me.